it's raining today. Pretty hard too, so I don't think it's going to stop. And what I read today? I guess the theme of all the stories I read seemed to revolve around police officers and trust in general with law enforcement and all that. I guess the first interesting one was a lot of police officers want to use things like drones for their work because it's more efficient and it's safer, but a lot of people are apprehensive about that. So apparently they're trying ways to get people to trust them to use it. It's kind of interesting. Here it says, will citizens ever be comfortable with police drones? The new program hopes to bring transparency to drone use by police departments. Privacy advocates are rightly concerned with the proliferation of drones in the hands of law enforcement. Can transparency help mollify concerns? That question is being put to the test in Southern California. The Chula Vista Police Department, which has an active drone program, is teaming up with AirData UAV to transparency public drone flights. Mirroring the increased focus by police departments nationwide on effective public information campaigns, the hope for law enforcement officials is that easily accessible data, including flight and mission details, will help mollify a distrustful public. Saying here, quote, transparency and accountability are key components in the success of our drone program, which has been an invaluable tool in maintaining the safety of our officers and the public. We pride ourselves in ensuring the public has access to our drone flight information and upholding the trust of our community. So that's kind of interesting just by reading this. So their plan is to make this data all available like for the public. Is that how this is going to be in terms of where they fly? You can just go up there and say, oh, let me look at the logs and all that. However, with that said, there's a lot of people who just don't trust it in general and say they should just get rid of it. Like it says here, the response in many cities have been tepid, and amid calls for regulation, more vocal advocates suggest outlawing police use of drones altogether. Saying here, the first and most obvious course of action in regulating police use of drone is to ban the technology entirely, a proposal a number of lawmakers and activists are currently pushing in New York City. As police have rolled out drone programs, cities have received them warily. In 2013, police in Seattle were on the verge of launching a drone program but abandoned it under public pressure, a pattern that repeated itself the following year in Los Angeles. My first thought is, in general, my opinion of it hasn't changed too much, where in theory, if you allow them to use things like a helicopter and all that to monitor people with cameras, and they're pretty high powered too, they can basically zoom in for like really far distance, then I don't see the issue of them using a drone in general because it's more efficient in many cases in that sense. At the same time, in terms of the topic of trust though, I think that's a completely different, I guess, can of worms, where I don't think the issue here is so much about the drone in particular, it's more about police in general. I think that would be the issue, where for some reason people are just not trusting that, let's just say, a law enforcement is on your side, if that's the right way to say it. Because even with things like a drone here, to my knowledge, I've never seen a police officer or a department come out and say, for example, hey, it's wrong to regulate some quote toys as if they're some kind of huge manned aircraft, and they're basically encouraging people to go out with this, I guess, false sense of belief that people flying quote toys are spying on people and all that, and they should be banned. So in that sense, now all of a sudden you say you can use it and it's safe. To me, as a regular public, I would say, well, why? That doesn't make sense. And you're basically feeding into that hysteria. So I think that's one of the issues in terms of trust when you get down to the core. The best example I can think of just recently with trust is how that story in Australia, where apparently there are huge lockdowns and there's been massive conflict between things like police officers and the regular public. And they apparently created some kind of flight restriction where no helicopters or drones or whatever could be able to fly around the vicinity and capture footage of what's going on. And ultimately, it seemed like the media and stuff, they won their lawsuit, if that's what you want to say, to be able to fly and document it. But like there, it's more about the trust of, okay, how come you can do this and these guys can't do that? That would be my concern as a regular, I guess, person, where it doesn't feel like you're on their side in terms of their rights and all that. Now with that thought, I thought this story I read was actually really fascinating in a lot of ways that relates to all this in terms of things like police trust and all that. And funny enough, it actually was in Australia too, to my knowledge. Now again, apparently there's been a lot of lockdowns and conflicts, people not trusting the police, And here you have someone who apparently is quitting the police force because they don't believe in the way things are being run in terms of regulations, police going out, trying to hunt down anybody, I guess, out in the public. For example, not going out at a certain time. If they're not wearing a mask, they'll potentially arrest them and all that, according to all the stuff I read anyways. Here it says, Acting Senior Sergeant Crystal Mitchell is a sworn member of the Victoria Police in Australia. She has served Victorians for 16 years as a police officer, including 6 years at Professional Standards Command, the division responsible for investigating police misconduct, corruption, discrimination, and freedom of information. It's over an hour and a half long, but it's so fascinating to see the perspective from a police officer in that sense, where they don't agree with the way things are being run, and it's creating so much division in their perspective, but they're forced to kind of do it anyways because it's their job.
There was a big thought process and battle of morals and integrity within me about what I wanted to do and how I see my organisation being used during this pandemic, and it troubled me greatly. The way in which we police now has completely changed, and a vast majority of the focus of policing is on show directions that are infringements on your everyday liberties and rights to just freely live in a democratic society. Instead of having these police officers investigating high harm, high impact offending and providing victims the opportunity to have their day in court and to receive justice, those police officers have been taken off those investigations to go and walk the streets of Melbourne to make sure that people don't gather to protest against something that is having significant impacts on their lives.
Kind of imagine that if that was like how it is around here, where there would be a police officer in every single corner asking you, why are you out today? Like apparently that's how it is over there right now anyways. That's what I gather from reading all the news and these interviews. And by doing that interview, she was expressing, well, I guess I have to quit because you're not allowed to speak out about stuff like that in general.
But you are right. The consequences of me being here today is that I will be resigning from Victoria Police effective the end of this interview.
Wow.
Because the consequences of me coming out publicly would be dismissal. I like my job and I like working for Victoria Police, and I'm a proud police officer. In part, the reason that I wanted to do this whilst still serving and wearing the uniform today is so that the community can see that it isn't all police that are against them, and for police to see that it isn't all protesters that are coming there to fight with you. It's a minority. There's a minority on both sides.
Then there was tidbits on how there's a lot of police officers apparently who don't agree with the way things are being done. And she was saying that many times when they approach people because of that, they wouldn't write them a ticket. They'll just give them like quote warnings and all that as their way of saying like they don't think it's right with what they're doing, but they have to do it because it's their job. So it's interesting to see that conflict. And in thinking about that and in terms of trust, just with this interview and stuff like that, I would trust this person in terms of what she would use, let's just say a drone for, and that she's on people's side because she's clearly showing here something's not right. She's speaking out about it, but at the same time, unfortunately, it's costing her her job and all that. But I would trust a police officer like this, so I think that's the big issue. If you're talking about things like drone and data and all that, ultimately it has to be stuff like this, where you're showing that you're on people's side. Like, don't forget why you're doing that job, if that makes sense. With that said, I don't think that necessarily means, for example, if you want people to trust you, like as a police officer, like here you'd have to say, oh, I'm quote anti-lockdown, I'm on these guys' side and all that, because everyone has different opinions in that way, which I even said myself, the only thing that's 100% during these times is nobody knows 100% what's the best way to deal with things and what's necessarily going on and all that. You have to show here where you recognize people's, I guess, frustrations, their opinions, things that don't seem right. You have to be willing to talk about it, but unfortunately, as she demonstrates, if you talk about it, that's it, you're fired, you lose your job or something like that. And that's not right, and there needs to be more of that in terms of that side where they're saying, okay, we'll listen to you, versus saying, hey, be quiet, I'm the authority figure. If you don't listen to me, I'll put you in jail. That's the perception that most people would have, and how can you blame people for not trusting, let's just say, a police officer and using things like a drone. And that example again, like in the Australia actually, where they banned everyone from using like a drone or something like that in the whole area with the restrictions, helicopters, because they don't want the situation documented. Like, why is it okay for this side or whatever to do that and not that side? So you have to show you are on, I guess, quote, people's side and what's in their best interest overall. A general thought I thought was fascinating too, where she brought up the point how, in terms of the things she doesn't agree with, like the way the lockdowns and stuff are run, trying to make people criminals, police out there monitoring everybody, like if they're just walking in a park. There's parts in history, as she says, where it was so similar, so she doesn't understand, I guess in many ways, how people aren't looking at the past and saying, why do we need to repeat this? You have all this knowledge of how it was in the past in these ways, so why allow stuff like that to happen again? It actually makes me wonder why more people don't think about it that way. I even say for myself, it doesn't matter if the topic, even if I don't understand it in particular, like whatever the hobby and stuff may be, if I see someone of an authority figure or something like that saying, I'm going to take this right away from them because it's for, I don't know, your safety and all that, I try to break it down saying, okay, are they actually doing anything that's super harmful in that way? Are there other ways to manage it? Because fundamentally, if what they're doing is okay, then it comes down to you're just taking away their rights. So that's not right in that sense. And looking at history, it may not affect me now, but if I agree that they should be able to do that, then one day they could come up to me and say, well, I don't like what you're doing in that case there too, so I'm gonna take that away. I don't see why people actually don't think about that in terms of the long term for various topics. It doesn't matter what it is. Alright, looks like there's no flying today. I guess it's time for the archive. Alright, see you guys later.